Hello, Hornets fans, and welcome back to another Buzz Beat, a Charlotte Hornets podcast. We are live on Twitter Spaces, Twitch, and YouTube, where you can interact with us. So feel free to submit comments or questions in the chat. Also, we've got a giveaway going on that ends on January 10th for a free t-shirt with our new logo on it. So take a look at our Twitter at BuzzBeatPod, or if you look in the notes of this episode for more details. On today's episode, I'll be joined by Brian. I'll be joined by Lee as we recap this thrilling but heartbreaking game against the Pacers and answer a listener question about a hypothetical trade. Lee, hope you're doing well. How's it going?
Oh, it's good to be here. This is for better or worse, this is kind of our type of game, right? Some interesting young flashes, which we'll get into. A close, competitive, hard-fought match on the road in Indiana, and another loss.
Yeah, that's how it goes. BG, how's your weekend going?
Weekend's going pretty well. A lot of college hoops and a little bit of Hornets action with two strange games for Charlotte this weekend. It feels like with the Bucks, bizarre, one of the weirdest games of the year with the blowout win on Friday, and then this game at Indiana. But yeah, things are good. How about you, Richie?
Doing good. Not a whole lot happening in my life, but I will say that this upcoming week I've got a lot of extracurricular activities. So this might be the one podcast that I'm able to record this week, but we may get another one out. It just may be without me. But yes, you are correct, Brian. The Hornets did play a couple of good games this weekend. The game tonight did not go in their favor as the Pacers won 116-111. So let's get into this game. I actually want to start with the lineup that we saw at the end of the first quarter and the end of the third quarter. Definitely offensive lacking, but it was certainly a defensive first lineup of DSJ, Cody Martin, who is starting to get in the swing of things, especially on the defensive side of the court, Jalen McDaniels, JT Thor, who's seeing somewhat consistent minutes, in Mark Williams. So that lineup went 12-0 run in both the end of the first quarter and third quarter combined. The Pacers were outscored in those final 13 possessions of that first quarter. And as expected, it didn't necessarily produce a ton on the offensive end. Jalen McDaniels had a little bit of a 5-0 run with him in the end of the third quarter, but they got after it. And on the defensive side, I really love to see them working in cohesion. They were on a string, and I hope we see more of it. I don't think it's going to be the starting lineup by any chance, but Clifford, with him being that coach, Brian, you texted this. It just feels like a Clifford-esque lineup, and it was fun to watch because those were the biggest runs of the game for Charlotte.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was like the size, the defense first, the winning play sort of mentality. Especially having two guys like Cody Martin and Dennis Smith Jr. out there at the same time. Like, it really does. They feel fully Martinized. I know Caleb Martin is in South Beach, but that sort of does bring back some vibes of those lineups from a few years ago. And the one thing I would say, Eric Collins mentioned he thought that this was probably the best defensive five Charlotte could put on the court.
I know what you're going to say, but keep going.
Yeah. I mean, it's close. I would just say PJ over Thor. And then, you would have Charlotte optimized defensively. I would say along with, DSJ, Cody, Mark Williams, who continues to play well, despite Miles Turner blocking him a couple of times tonight. Turner was a menace at the rim. It felt like the entire game. And I know this is something we have discussed a few times now, but it is a bummer to see no Nick Richards once again. It just stinks that he's having the best season of his career, and an injury is what took him out. And I get it. It's Mark Williams is playing well. Mason Plumlee is playing well. And, Plumlee's still on the roster as of, January 8th. So I guess he's going to continue to play until maybe a hypothetical trade comes to fruition. So, but no, fun to see that lineup. And I think the best part of it, one, is it's nice to see DSJ. It's nice to see Cody Martin healthy and on the court, but it's also good to see Mark Williams getting those reps. And I thought Williams tonight did some nice stuff defensively. Not just in the drop on the pick and roll. Like, you're seeing him with some of those sort of like half switches or late switches or sort of like moving over to guys around the rim. And I thought the mobility defensively with Mark has looked really good, not just tonight, but really since he became a part of the rotation for Charlotte.
Yeah, let's talk about Mark Williams here real quick. I think he started off very strong. He ended up finishing with 7 points on the night in 16 minutes, and he played well in moments. He had his flashes. He's good when he has the chance of just grabbing the ball cleanly and going up right away, which he did on occasion. Although when he does go up against better and more experienced players like Miles Turner, you start to see where he has areas to improve. He had this one play in the second quarter where he actually had an awesome seal on Turner. Like, that's been a strength of his, but he still gets blocked by Turner. It's that combination of Turner just being an elite shot blocker, but you can also start asking yourself these questions like, did I position the ball the way that I wanted to? Did I shield it the best way possible? Am I keeping the ball high? Like, these are questions that Mark Williams can be asking himself. So sometimes it's fun to watch him play against, younger players, less experienced players, and he puts up the stats, but going up against Miles Turner, it's a teaching moment for him, a lesson for him when you go up against guys like that. So I will say that, it's not always going to be the case where he's playing against backups. So this was a good teaching moment for him.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I echo the frustrations with the fact that Clifford has just chosen to and he's just going to do it. Like, we've got enough of a sample size at this point. Like, he's not going away from it. And look, maybe there is some nudging or direction from the front office that Plumlee needs to kind of like continue to be showcased for a potential move down the road. Like, obviously that's I'm speculating only, but that's certainly possible. I would be saying the same. I would be voicing the same frustrations if Clifford immediately went back with Richards and just immediately benched Williams or sent Williams back to Greensboro. Like, it's the same principle. Like, we just should, in my opinion, be playing both of the young centers the majority of the center minutes, because it's not like a freaking charity case. Like, they've both shown the ability to be effective, solid rotational young center. So it's not just a throw them out there for development's sake. It's like, these guys seem like they can be solid rotation players. Get them both out there. We'll see whether or not whatever happens with Plum Dog at the deadline is yet to be seen. The one thing I think I would, add on to some of Richie's comments about Mark Williams is just his, dogged activity around the rim. He is just absolutely relentless. I mean, again, a lot like Richards is. I mean, I think Williams has a little bit more vertical athleticism, certainly a little bit more length, and does a lot of the same stuff, but just can get to so many in traffic rebounds. Even if he doesn't snare it himself, he's keeping it alive. He's tipping it. Like, the results aren't always positive at this point, but the fact that he can kind of just in short stretches, even like almost dominate a game at the rim at the NBA level already as a rookie is really impressive. Miles Turner was awesome tonight. He obviously gave Mark Williams quite a few kind of welcome to the NBA moments. Mm-hmm. This is completely off track and not something we need to discuss in detail on this podcast, but like, I had a thought as this game was ending, like, the Pacers just need to extend Miles Turner.
Yeah.
Like, he is really good, and he fits their roster and fits their timeline. Like, I'm sure they're trying, but and I'm not an expert in Pacers basketball, but
I mean, it seems like that has changed just this season.
totally.
I mean, like they're
good.
playing really fun basketball. Like if you look up they're playing fast. They shoot a ton of threes. Rick Carlisle's getting the best out of guys like Aaron Nesmith, a nice second draft player.
Totally.
Andrew Nembhard, I know he was like up and down today, but man, he had some sick finishes for Indiana late in this game, just showing off the body control and the functional strength. And Matherin, obviously he really struggled, but they've just got a really nice mix, and Turner opens the floor for all of those guys. And I thought for the most part, Indiana did a decent job keeping the ball in front. Charlotte still got to the rim a bunch, but they shot a terrible number at the rim because Turner's just there to obliterate or alter or contest, any shot around the basket. So yeah, I it's one of those things. It's part of me thinks like this, they should just sell high right now. Like this is it. But no, it seems more likely they should probably extend him, and that's what they're going to do. And you can always trade him later. Like, if you're ever looking for like a short-term reset around Matherin and Halliburton, you can always move him later. So I'm guessing he'll get extended and be back because he's earned it, quite frankly.
Yeah, they've got a good mix of veterans and young players. And I think now that Sabonis is out of the picture, it's a little bit more of a clear case in terms of the future with him. And he's never said he's wanted to go somewhere else. The rumors just tend to follow him.
It would be Richie, it really would be the funniest result of this if 4 years of trade, like rumors of Miles Turner being traded, and just like, nope, he just signed a $90 million extension over 4 years. Like that would be the funniest. Maybe that would extend the possible trade.
Yeah, I hope.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's funny.
It'll never end. But let's talk about the elephant in the room here. LaMelo Ball, 6 personal fouls, fouling out tonight. And, he had it overall. I thought like he had a good game for the most part when he was in there. He had a couple of baseline drives, wraparound passes to PJ for 3. He had a couple of like driving scoop layups on back-to-back possessions in the first quarter. It's a good sign that he's attacking the rim there. But when he picked up that 3rd foul in the second quarter, Indiana went on a run. And then 20 seconds into the second half, picks up another foul. And that was the 4th foul at that point, and he played through it in the 3rd quarter pretty well. But obviously this is an issue that has been with him throughout the course of his career. And I act like his career has been long, but it's been with him ever since he's entered the league. It's going to be a challenge for him to play without fouling. What are your thoughts on this, guys? And just how does he get better at this? I guess it's just positioning and knowing when to gamble and knowing when not to gamble.
Yeah, I think it might be that simple, Richie. I mean, some of the guys in the BuzzBeat Slack were discussing Zach Lowe, who wrote about kind of some of LaMelo's defensive shortcomings in a recent article that was really well laid out. I think it's all the boilerplate stuff. It's like, young point guard that can't keep his hands off guys and that lacks kind of the, quote unquote championship focus on just like locking in on every defensive possession. It hurt the Hornets tonight, right? I mean, the last 2 possessions they had to play without LaMelo Ball in a super close game. If this was a year where the Hornets were fighting for playoff position, that would have been a big deal. I
think the Hornets would have won this game had he not picked up that 3rd foul.
Yeah, because he wouldn't have had to sit out like whatever that was. Yeah. I don't know, 7 or 8 minute stretch, right? And you were talking about Cody Martin kind of starting to get into a rhythm. Obviously, he had the awesome block tonight. In the against Heald in transition, he hit his first 3 of the year being back. So like good signs. I also thought Dennis Smith Jr. Is starting to kind of look a little bit more like his old self, like was a bit more disruptive defensively tonight, and even had kind of that late bully bucket against Halliburton. But the last couple possessions just weren't quite as clean without LaMelo. You need LaMelo's playmaking and shooting out there. And I wish I had like a magic wand, some like unique observation that no one has brought up yet regarding kind of his ability to avoid some of this foul trouble. But I think it's as simple as kind of presence in mind and maturity, and like a little bit of laziness, to be frank. Like he does use his hands far too often. He does pick up fouls at times, 50, 60 feet away from the basket that we've gotten frustrated with at times on this podcast. So, that's that for me.
Yeah. It's like some of the stuff you can live with when he's like flying around and trying to be in the right place and trying to get steals because the Hornets are a bad half court offense. They need to get in transition. He's good in transition. So it's like some of that stuff, it's like, no, you live with that. It's the senseless reaching in, that you would love for him to be able to cut out. I sometimes think he gets a tough whistle, but that doesn't justify, like this is a trend across seasons, across different referees officiating him. This is just like a part of his game. And I think it's something that will get ironed out. I think it has to get ironed out, so it will. But yeah, he played 24 minutes in this game. Like that happens just like all too often. We're like, not only does he miss big stretches of the game, but then he also fouls out and you look up and it's like, yeah, he played half the game. Like, what? This game was a coin flip. And like, I mean, because of where the season is and where the team is, it does create this weird dissonance where it's like, a loss is like not bad for Charlotte, obviously, but as we're trying to like evaluate these games, you're thinking about habits, right? You're thinking about long-term development. And so that's why you want to get that stuff out for LaMelo. But in the short term, and Richie, I'd be curious to hear what you think about this with LaMelo, but it does create this like weird kind of division of labor when he fouls out too, because then you get these Rozier and DSJ lineups, which theoretically I think should fit. But then sometimes like Terry wants to get into like, put some sauce on the basketball mode and start dancing around the court. And like, obviously he's the tough shot maker, but then DSJ is just off the ball.
Yeah. That doesn't work.
And, it's like, he can do some of the catch and go stuff. Like, he can slash and get into gaps a little bit, but it does clog the floor a little bit. It doesn't space it as well. And not only that, like, Terry is not the best guy to just give the ball to and say like, here's a high ball screen, like go run good offense for us. But so, yeah, like when you lose LaMelo, it just, there's no Devontae Graham to fall back on, right? To just come in and just, prop up. There's no one like that here anymore. So I don't know, Richie, what are your thoughts on LaMelo and some of the foul concerns, or maybe just like where he is with his game right now?
Well, it's interesting that you brought up, when he does have to go to the bench and you're seeing these lineups with DSJ and Rozier. To me, like you got to get the ball out of Rozier's hand and let him run off ball. Too frequently we've seen this season, even when Rozier is not the quote unquote point guard, that he dribbles the ball a little bit too much for my liking. And I feel like it's almost like a habit that just carried over from when he started the season as that point guard with that second unit. And when you have DSJ off ball, he just doesn't seem like an off ball guy to me. He's not a off ball like cutter or anything like that. Like he's a guy that's a rim pressure guy, drive and kick. But also too, with Rozier just having an inconsistent season, and we saw it again tonight. Like he was coming off an awesome game, awesome outing against the Bucks, and obviously he had the difficult assignment of guarding Halliburton and expending all the energy on that end. But outside like of a couple of mid-range makes and offensive rebounds and creating second chance points, like he competes. Like that's one thing that we've talked about on the podcast. Like visibly you can see him competing on that end, but his shooting inconsistencies have been too glaring this season. So I know that wasn't really much of a LaMelo talk there, but when he does go to the bench, it just throws the whole thing out of whack.
Yeah, Terry Rozier 5 of 15 shooting in this game, 7 turnovers. Like those things are related, right? LaMelo playing half the game. And I mean, look, Terry was due for some regression after Friday night when he went insane against the Bucks. But yeah, like he played big minutes tonight and he had a lot of time on the basketball, and that rarely produces like efficient half-court offense for Charlotte. And just according to Cleaning the Glass, the Hornets 0.84 points per possession in the half court today. So that was really bad, and that's just par for the course with them.
Yeah, and the Pacers aren't necessarily like, when you look at them from a whole, like I thought they'd be better defensively just based on the way that they played tonight. Like overall, I don't know what they are, like 15, 16, 17, something like that in the NBA when it comes to defensive rating. But they played well in stretches. And I know that the offense for the Hornets plays a factor in that as well. But quick mention before we move on to the listener questions, I do want to give a shout out to Jalen McDaniels. He makes plays in bunches. I've mentioned that before. He comes in waves in terms of his scoring output, his defensive output. That end of the third quarter, in the middle of the fourth quarter, there was plays that he made that impacted the game, that put the Hornets up a couple of points midway through the fourth quarter, but obviously they could not hang on. And then PJ Washington, they made a note of this on the broadcast, and I've made a note of this before, but the area in which he can take advantage of is that short mid-range floater game. And by my count, he was 2 of 4 on floaters, and he was 3 of 3 against the Bucks on Friday night. So he's got the ability to put the ball on the court. He's got the ability to slip screens, and I just want to see more of that. But Lee or Brian, would you want to speak upon Jalen or PJ or anything else before we get to the questions?
No, I mean, just I think in kind of the theme of this podcast this season, this is one of those PJ Washington games where he really shows kind of his true versatility, his true value. I think I have just kind of one more overarching thought, which involves McDaniels but isn't specific to him. I watched this team as it gets back a bit more healthy, and it's just so strange. I mean, they've been so bad on both ends of the floor this year. It's been such a disastrous season in so many ways. But like, there's this bevy of young, useful players on this roster, some that aren't even in the rotation right now. I mean, Bryce McGowan's and Nick Richards are both DMPs tonight.
Yeah.
And both of them, obviously Richards, more so, and he's older, obviously, but both have shown reasons to be optimistic, I would say. Jalen McDaniels, JT Thor, Cody Martin, Mark Williams, Dennis Smith Jr., Teo Maladon. I mean, all of these
Kai Jones.
What's that?
Kai Jones. You remember
Kai
him?
Jones. I mean, all these different guys. And granted, a couple of those guys we mentioned, are still not necessarily 100% second contract guys. Like, they're still working towards that. Mm-hmm. I think McDaniels has proven that. Obviously, Cody Martin has proven that because he signed one. It's a good feeling though. Like, there is some kernels of optimism, and I've said this before, and I've on this podcast, and I've tweeted it before too. It again just continues to give you the 1-year tank plan right there on a silver platter, because you can shed a couple veteran contracts in Oubre and Plumlee if they're not traded this offseason, and you can continue to retool this roster around LaMelo Ball with another draft class, with another likely high draft pick. And if the Hornets were able to hit it big, whether that is Wemby or whether that is striking gold on a top 5 pick who's an immediate positive player, they stand ready with a useful roster of guys like Jalen McDaniels, who can be two-way players, who can make shots, who can play making a pinch, and there's just there is still an optimistic future in my mind, but we'll see.
Yeah. What I would say, just a couple of things on some of the guys you mentioned. One, it has been nice to see JT. It stinks that it's been at the sacrifice of not having Kai Jones in the rotation still, but yeah, I think JT Thor's had some positive minutes for Charlotte recently, and he's still a bit of a mystery box. And I still, at this point, yeah, I think we'd all would have liked to have seen at least a little bit more development, but he's still really, really young. And he still really hasn't played that many NBA minutes. So I'm still feeling relatively confident in him long term as a prospect. I think a lot of stuff will fall into place if he can just get consistent with the catch and shoot three. Like he's shooting 20% on threes this season. He's taking a ton of corner threes.
I just
think once that falls, like everything else just clicks into place because he can give you some good hustle play stuff. He's got the length. He has the ability to attack closeouts. I mean, he's gonna have to really improve his finishing and decision making on those drives. But it's like that's the next step, but you can't get to there until the three starts to really go down. And Richie, you've talked about this. I know you've tweeted about this a few times. You just mentioned it with PJ. I would say one of the things, like at least one of the floaters he got tonight, and then one of the floater runners, however you want to label them, that he hit against Milwaukee. The one tonight came where Charlotte ran in the third. This is in the third quarter, about 10 minutes to play. They ran a little like delay with PJ in the corner. They had him come off a pin down into a handoff with Plumlee, the Chicago action, and he shot a runner. And one of the floaters he hit against Milwaukee the other night was Brook Lopez is in the drop, LaMelo, Mason Plumlee pick and roll. Mason gets it on the short roll. PJ stationed on the weak side wing or corner. And Plumlee, there's no finish for him at the rim because Lopez is in there. And he just dribbles to his left, hands the ball off to PJ. PJ comes off of it, the DHO, and shoots a runner. And what I would say the thread between those two makes are that he's coming off movement. And he's coming downhill to his right hand. And so I like when they can get him those kinds of looks from the mid-range as opposed to like isolating at the elbow, where everything is sort of like flat and stagnant. And I like them encouraging a little bit of movement, trying to get him downhill a little bit, going into those looks. So I think that's sort of like I'd have to something to probably pay attention to a little bit more on my end, at least, before I spout off like that. But I do think that's something that I have noticed a little bit with PJ. It's just that I think they're getting him in motion a little bit more, whether it's like sort of like flowing from organically from, playing out of the play, or it's, these are designed actions that are being run to get PJ going downhill a little bit that way. And what I would say too, as far as like the draft, we're not to go off on a whole other tangent here, but like the 1 year tank, like, it's like Lee, you and I talked about this months ago. Like it's probably not like the best course of action. You would want probably a more like holistic sort of teardown, but it's there and it can work. I do think it is interesting though, if the Hornets end up, with one of the worst records in the league and they end up getting pick 3 or something like that. Like I think Amen Thompson is like a knockout type of prospect, but like as good as he is and as special as he is, he's the guy that maybe like Scoot and Wemby are going to help you win games next season.
Exactly.
Amen Thompson might. He's got tools and athleticism out to wazoo, but like it may take, it may take a little bit more time. I don't know if that changes their thought process, especially at this point. But I don't know. That is one extra thing to consider but to your point, I agree. It's something we discussed back in September or October. I think it was October during the Wemby pod. Like the 1 year free fall is right there for Charlotte.
It's like a 14% chance at 1 or 2 is worth it.
Totally. I mean, when's the last time Charlotte had that kind of percentage chance to improve I know it's one of those things where you're like, wow, odds don't sound that good, but it's when you think about like, when's the last time Charlotte had that good of a chance to land a player of this caliber, a prospect of this caliber? Like 2012 draft lottery, like that's probably the last time. So, and I know the lottery odds were different back then, but yeah, it's been a long time. So it's something to consider too.
All right, let's end this conversation with 2 trade-related questions. And one's not a question. One was a suggestion from Bobby Marks on the Low Pat podcast. But we're going to get to our listener question first from @CaptainRegulator. What is Mason Plumlee's trade value? In parentheses, he's put, not a joke. This is serious. He could really help a team like the Nets. Would a Plumlee-Seth Curry trade be good for both teams? Thanks. So I know we do joke about Plumlee's trade value, and people joke about him all the time. And even Spencer just talks about buying him out to kind of get him out of the center rotation altogether. And we mentioned or at least we hinted at this at the top of the podcast, where he is basically clogging the development of Nick Richards and Mark Williams for a team that is not going anywhere. But if he's bought out, that's fine. But I do think that he could net you a second round pick or maybe a flyer on a younger-ish player that may need a change of scenery. I'm not sure what Brooklyn would think about this trade. They may need a big that's a little bit more physically imposing, that can snag rebounds. I mean, maybe Plumlee can do that for them. And Seth Curry, I've always liked. I mean, he's a good spacer, which the Hornets need. But I do believe he is on a expiring contract as well. So, you're not really investing in him, other than maybe there's some kind of Curry discount that they might get because of the name. But, I just wonder if Plumlee would be better used trying to get a draft pick in the second round, of course, or maybe a younger guy. Like, I'm not suggesting Cam Thomas by any means, but, that's kind of how I feel about this trade thought. And what are your thoughts, guys? Like, second round pick, do you think that's fair?
Yeah. When we talked about Plumlee trade hypotheticals a few weeks ago, we just sort of said, like, you're probably shooting too high if you think you're getting something more than like a so-so second round pick, which, like, that's fine. Like, that's not nothing. or if you get a young player for it, let's be real. If they were to go the hypothetical trade route with Brooklyn, it would be Day'Ron Sharp. Bring the in-state UNC guy back to the Hornets. That would make a lot of sense, probably. Yeah, I mean, like, I do think Brooklyn could use an upgrade at backup center right now. I mean, Claxton's been awesome for them. He was very good against Charlotte last week. And obviously Simmons is playing a lot of center minutes for them too. So I don't know. I don't know if they would be willing to give up one of their shooters. I know they have a lot of shooters, including, some guys have missed time. And maybe when you have Joe Harris and Patty Mills, maybe you think one of those guys is expendable. But if I were them, I think Curry's a guy that can actually help you win in the postseason, just because of the shooting and the gravity and some of the actions you can run with him. And I don't know if
Seth Curry can't shoot 6 of 6 with his offhand from the free throw.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. Yes. I mean, one of the few places where the two former Duke teammates, where one of them would Mason would be able to outclass Seth in terms of shooting specifically. But I think it's interesting. I think there are Plumlee trade hypotheticals that exist because he's playing very well.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see teams that need a backup center that can give you, he's not a terrible defender. Not like he's a great defender, but a little bit of defense. He can rebound. He gives you some pick and roll versatility. I just, as an aside, I did not like Charlotte using him to like trap and hedge at times tonight. I don't really understood why they went that route, but also he can pass a little bit and he can give you some screen and dive. And if the free throw shooting is real, not like you'd need him on the court closing games out, but maybe that's a small added assurance. So I think there's going to be a market for Plumlee. I think there are teams that could use a backup center, but I don't think Curry is I don't think getting another veteran like that, because you're not getting, if you move Plumlee, it's not like you're getting off like long-term salary if you bring back an expiring contract too, right? Like his deal is set to expire. So the way to like capitalize on that is to actually get, a pick or a young player that you can build with going forward.
Yeah, agreed there. I think you're getting a second round pick or a buyout. I think Seth's kind of, he's a big time shooter. I don't think and even though, like BG said, like Brooklyn's like maybe the one team in the entire league that could actually do to lose some shooting. I don't think Plumlee's getting you that.
Yeah. And I just think Brooklyn is going to lean all the way into this identity. Like they're the jump shooting team, as opposed to like incrementally trying to get a little bit better at the backup center spot and a little bit better rebounding wise. I just think they're leaning all the way into, we switch everything, Durant's in God mode, and we have all the shooters in the world that make tough pull-up jumpers.
All right, I'm going to play a clip from the Low podcast about Bobby Marks and his suggestion here, and we'll end the podcast on this.
One you like? I think the one I would like, and I don't know how it benefits Charlotte, just because Mark Williams has been playing a lot more, and their first round pick. would be Wiseman and Moody for Plumlee and Washington. That would be the one. My concern with that from Golden State is now you got to pay PJ Washington, right? Like restricted free agent, add to that tax bill. Plumlee becomes a free agent.
Yeah, so this is a trade that was presented on the Low Podcast by Bobby Marks. I actually don't think it's beneficial for either team. This actually does nothing for Golden State in terms of the tax. It actually raises the money that they owe this year by $1.5 million. Yes, it might get you off several years of Moody and at least 1 year off of Wiseman, but I don't know. It feels like, what Bobby was saying there. If they're investing in this trade, they're also investing in PJ. And if it's just a 1 year rental to make a play in the playoffs where they're 8th, 9th, 10th at this point in the season, I'm not sure it's worth it for either side here. And I don't think the Hornets would be wise to do this either. I feel like they could get a little bit more for PJ, like in a separate deal altogether. And if I'm trading Plumlee, I've mentioned this before, I'm not doing it to acquire a center, like at least one that's not like, a little bit unproven on a rookie contract. Like the purpose of trading Plumlee is to see what you got with Nick Richards and Mark Williams. As far as Moody goes, we've talked about him pre-draft, and he grew on me during the pre-draft process. Now, if it was Kuminga in this deal, I don't think Golden State would do it. But if it was Kuminga, we would have to add something there. But if it was Kuminga in this deal, I think that like with his defensive versatility and just being an impactful player. But it was funny, like Moody was actually impactful in the playoffs last year for Golden State. He played minutes.
I mean, he's ready to be like an NBA rotation player. Like he's proven it. I think he's going to be like a real player in the NBA for a long time. The dude he had a nice game against Charlotte the other week. Like he comes in and just makes impact winning plays, but he's on a team with a lot of good veterans in front of him. There's not a lot of runway for him to work with, even when you have a guy like Steph Curry currently out or whatever. I can't remember if it was with you guys, the pod that we did after the Sixers blowout win over Charlotte. Are you still watching that one? Or like Spencer and I recorded one right before that. And on both those pods, we talked about PJ, because on the pod that Spencer and I recorded, this was on December 8th, I believe. That pod was sort of like, well, the Hornets didn't extend PJ, so they're probably going to try to trade him, right? Like that was what we talked about a lot on that one. We actually talked about Golden State hypothetical trades too. And I can't remember if it was the one with Spencer or the one that I did a couple of days later with you guys, but I remember posing the question, well, what do you think PJ Washington has more trade value on? Like, is it on an expiring contract now? Or is it you sign him, bring him back, and then, if things aren't going well in a couple of years, you could look to flip him when he's got a couple of years left on his second contract. I mean, that's probably depends or whatever, but he's still young and getting better. And, at some point in time, he could be a pretty good trade piece, hypothetically on a second contract. And yeah, this is one of the reasons why, like, we went through Golden State, again, on these pods in early December, we went through these Golden State hypotheticals. And the one that was getting tossed around at the time was like PJ for Wiseman. Like it's kind of, that was the deal. This was before Mark Williams was in the rotation too, right? So one, can you imagine just adding Wiseman to the center rotation of that you already have Richards and Williams would just be a hilarious center room that I can't fathom happening. But one of the reasons why I just don't see this thing being realistic is like if you trade for PJ, I think the thought would be you would want to re-sign him. Mm-hmm. And I just can't see Golden State. It's really, I mean, I admit, look, that ownership group has proven they're willing to spend a lot of money, but like, I don't know, maybe you see him as like the long-term replacement for Draymond. Like, I can't imagine that's the case or whatever, but they just owe a lot of money to a lot of different guys. And there's more guys they're going to have to pay, but you're already paying money to Poole, Thompson, Green, Curry, Wiggins. Like, can you afford PJ at $20 million a year or whatever? Like, I doubt it. So I think it makes some sense if you can just like, if you could remove the finances in the money. And I think Moody would absolutely be a great piece to pick up. I mean, Charlotte could have had him on the roster. They opted for James Bouknight instead. So again, I would be open for moves that could add a player like Moses Moody. I think that's the kind of stuff that Charlotte, the waters they should be swimming in. But I don't think this is like how that gets done, personally.
Yeah, I think all I would say is, like, number one, I like Nick Richards more than James Wiseman right now. I like Mark Williams more than James Wiseman right now. So I agree that swapping Plumlee for a young center doesn't make a ton of sense, which, to be fair, Bobby Marks, like he mentioned that. I do think I would be, I think, maybe fairly optimistic that PJ could help Golden State in a deep playoff run. But like you said,
he totally would. He totally
would. It's just the complications of the extension. I don't remember which one of you said it, but I also agree that if you're gonna move PJ, and I've been pretty adamant that PJ, along with like the obvious other ones, like LaMelo, like PJ's kind of the one guy I still don't want to move. Like, I think because, number one, if you do want to move PJ, you're going to get more value from him, which goes back to one of y'all saying this after his extension. Like, extend PJ, keep him here, and then if you need to trade him later, that's fine. Like, so those are my thoughts. It was interesting. I think it was certainly worth bringing up as we get closer and closer to the trade deadline. We know that Kelly Oubre is not going back to Golden State. That's certainly that's for sure. So I thought it was interesting, but ultimately I don't think it makes a ton of sense for either team.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that PJ and Plumlee are kind of like Golden State type of guys, and they would kind of fit seamlessly within the offensive system that they run. I mean, even Plumlee could be a guy that could work out of the high post, and he would not be a Draymond like split cut hub, but like he could kind of act in the same way.
No, well,
he could do some of
it. What's the Australian dude that was the first pick? He's kind of like
Bogut.
Yeah, he's like Bogut.
Yeah. No, he would be able to do, like, if you could let him do that stuff with Curry and Thompson, it would work very well. it would be very effective. And yeah, PJ would be awesome for them, and they could do all kinds of cool small ball stuff with Draymond and PJ as like the 4-5, with Wiggins and Clay and Steph, or Wiggins and Poole and Clay. Like, there's just all kinds of stuff they could do. But I personally don't see that happening, though I see the way it could benefit both sides.
All right. We appreciate everyone for tuning in on Twitter Spaces. We did not get a speaker request. We appreciate everyone tuning in on YouTube. This will be out as a podcast tomorrow morning. We're going to go ahead and wrap here. We appreciate the support. For Lee, for Brian,